There is a war going on. It's a real war. You know why this is a war. It started out as a special military operation, but it continues as a war because Berlin, Paris, The Hague, Oslo, Washington, unfortunately, to actively support Kiev. There are a great many companies in Poland that manufacture drones, which then fly toward us and attack our military personnel. Of course, there's nothing good about that.
Ahead of the NATO summit, a Putin aide is lashing out at Kiev's allies and accusing them of dangerous provocation. The Kremlin is warning that NATO support for Ukraine's drone war is driving escalation. A Putin aide has dismissed claims of a Russian plot targeting Poland as scare tactics and horror stories pushed by the West. Moscow says the conflict has been driven from a so-called special military operation toward a wider war by outside backing for Ukraine.
Konstantinovka is a very significant strategic line and represents a crucial step toward capturing such an important, I would say, joint fortified area as Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. No one should have any doubt that our military is advancing smoothly, and we see concrete results. Of course, the Kiev regime is fighting back, trying to make an illusion for its handlers and its NATO partners to create the impression that it is somehow capable of exerting pressure. But those who understand the situation know that this is not the case.
The Kiev regime times these actions to coincide with major summits. The NATO summit is coming up soon. By all accounts, should we expect more serious provocations?
We must be prepared for provocations and remain vigilant at all times. There is a war going on. It's a real war. You know why this is a war. It started out as a special military operation, but it continues as a war because Berlin, Paris, The Hague, Oslo, Washington, unfortunately, to actively support Kiev. They are helping take aim through their satellites. They are helping direct foreign weapons at our targets through their entire infrastructure. Under these circumstances, we must be fully aware of the situation. The Kiev regime is capable of anything.
You've just listed all these Western capitals. The question naturally arises, why are we trying to figure out our relations with the Kiev regime? We need to settle things with them, don't we? With those who are stirring up war.
This is a factor that exacerbates the situation. I am referring to the European Union, which is gradually transforming into a military political bloc.
We cannot rule out even greater provocations by the Kiev regime. Zelensky stated yesterday that only the island of Moscow will stop Putin. I don't know what he means by that. What do you think of this rhetoric and these statements and actions by the Kiev regime?
Well, the main thing, I suppose, isn't rhetoric, but actions. These actions are of a terrorist nature. The Kiev regime is striking our energy facilities and civilian infrastructure, targets that have absolutely nothing to do with the military-industrial complex. This is a completely obvious manifestation of the Kiev regime's terrorist nature. Why is this intensifying now? Because the situation on the front lines is deteriorating for Kiev with each passing day. Our troops are advancing.
There have been articles in the British and Polish press. They report that, in light of everything that's happening, it cannot be ruled out that Russia is preparing to attack Poland in the coming months. Have you seen them?
There are a lot of horror stories being published about Russia. In any case, it makes sense to think about them. There are a great many companies in Poland that manufacture drones, which then fly toward us and attack our military personnel. Of course, there's nothing good about that.
They need to remember that the situation could develop in any way.
I wouldn't go so far as to become some sort of doomsday prophet, but this is a fact that this is happening on Polish territory. You remember the publication by our defense ministry with a list of companies detailing their geographical locations across many European countries. We remain open to peace talks. It would be preferable for us to achieve all our objectives through peaceful diplomatic negotiations. We hope that the European Union will not succeed in completely dashing these prospects. In this regard, we hope that U.S. mediators will continue their efforts as acts of goodwill.
Western media report that U.S. President Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and businessman Jared Kushner are in almost daily contact with Moscow. Is this really the case?
That might be an exaggeration, but contact through the existing channels is indeed quite frequent. They are busy at the moment. Once they've got time, they'll always be welcome in Moscow.
Are there any specific dates on the horizon yet?
No.
Poland and Ukraine concluded an agreement about some sort of eternal peace and eternal love. What do you think of what's happening now?
There are many people in Kyiv whose hobby is to bite the hand that feeds them. We remember this all well from our own experience. But now the Poles have experienced that. The Kyiv regime glorifies Nazi collaborators and Nazis who murder Poles. Is this not the ultimate paradox of modern reality in Europe? They were ready to put up with it for a while longer. But Kyiv has now gone beyond reason. Even cynicism has ceased to help the Poles in this situation.
It keeps on going beyond reason. Some kind of pantheon has already been created.
Yes, they have gone too far in their worship of the Nazis.
Moscow claimed the Baltic states had provided air corridors for Ukrainian drones carrying out attacks inside Russian territory. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Galuzin said Moscow had verified the information, according to RT. Galuzin claimed Latvia and other Baltic republics allowed Ukrainian drones to reach civilian targets deep inside Russia. The allegations followed months of long-range Ukrainian drone attacks targeting Russia's Leningrad region and other areas. Russian officials also claimed several explosive-laden drones had crashed in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia during recent operations. Latvia's ruling coalition collapsed in May amid political disputes over its response to Ukrainian drone incursions. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said he raised the issue with Zelensky and described the drone flights as unacceptable. Estonia also reported intercepting several drones that entered its airspace during recent months. Estonia said it was unhappy about the incursions but would not ask Ukraine to halt the operations, its foreign minister told the Financial Times. Russia's Security Council secretary had earlier warned Moscow could invoke Article 51 of the UN Charter if necessary. Shoigu said Russia could claim the right to self-defense if NATO states knowingly provided airspace for Kiev's drone operations. Russia claimed 4 FAB-500 guided bomb strikes destroyed a Ukrainian drone control hub in the Donetsk region. Russian Defense Ministry visuals shared by RT showed a UAV guiding the precision strike onto its designated target. The released footage showed a massive explosion, followed by thick black smoke billowing over the strike location. Russia's Defense Ministry also claimed its forces captured the strategic settlement of Kostiantynivka during ongoing operations. Moscow further claimed its troops took control of Vasilevka and 4 additional settlements in the Kharkiv region. The Russian Defense Ministry said UAVs struck the Kantsarovka oil terminal and a nearby fuel depot during the operation. Russia also claimed its drones destroyed a Ukrainian UAV storage site as part of the same wave of strikes. Moscow added that Su-34 fighter aircraft carried out airstrikes against targets in the Donetsk and Sumy regions. The Defense Ministry said Russian air defenses also intercepted more than 500 Ukrainian aerial targets during the period. Moscow claimed the intercepted weapons included FP-5 cruise missiles as well as HIMARS multiple launch rockets. The attacks came as Russia said its recent mass strikes focused on Ukraine's defense industry and military facilities. The Defense Ministry also claimed Russian air defenses intercepted around 13,000 aerial targets throughout June. Officials in Moscow say Russian forces shot down more than 500 Ukrainian air threats overnight on July 3, portraying the scale of the attack as unprecedented and their defensive response as coordinated and effective. According to Russia's Defense Ministry, Ukraine launched 494 long-range drones, 9 HIMARS projectiles and 10 Flamingo missiles, underscoring Kyiv's reliance on large-scale standoff attacks to strike deep into Russian territory. These developments were formally reported by Russia's Defense Ministry on July 4, as part of an official briefing that aimed to shape public perception of the overnight clashes and reassure domestic audiences. Moscow argues that Ukraine launched these strikes to distract both its own citizens and foreign allies from what Russia calls Kyiv's battlefield failures, claiming the drone barrages are more about messaging than military success. The ministry added that any Ukrainian bid to damage Russian civilian sites will not go unanswered, warning that Moscow will respond by expanding its security zone and increasing pressure on targets inside Ukraine. The statement said, and I quote, "Zelensky's attempt in this way to divert the attention of Ukrainians and foreign sponsors from the consequences of the Russian strike on July 2, 2026 against military facilities near Kyiv. And the catastrophic failure of the armed forces of Ukraine in Konstantinovka was thwarted by actions of Russian air defense systems. Air targets were neutralized under the unified command of the main command of the Russian aerospace forces. On all the lines of the air defense system created by professional and courageous actions of the combat, crews of the anti-aircraft missile troops, mobile firing groups, and fighter and army aviation crews." Unquote. Russia says that, in June alone, it destroyed roughly 13,000 Ukrainian air threats, a figure intended to show both the intensity of Kyiv's long-range campaign and the constant pressure on Russian air defense systems. Moscow further claims that many of these drones and missiles were produced with backing from a majority of European countries, including the UK, using this narrative to frame Europe as a direct participant in the war. Earlier, Vladimir Putin called for a prolonged analysis of Western involvement in the conflict, suggesting that Russia will systematically review each foreign actor's role in prolonging the war before deciding how to respond.
What I'd like to point out is that the more strikes the enemy attempts to launch against our civilian facilities, and of course, we must first and foremost do everything necessary to protect these facilities and defend civilians. But the more attempts the enemy makes of this kind, the bigger the security zone we will need to create in the surrounding territory, especially since, just like the other territories we are discussing today, this is historically Russian land. In addition, there should be a continued analysis of each instigator's involvement in prolonging the war in Ukraine. An analysis must be conducted on the engagement of each of them in actual hostilities. We need this analysis for making possible responsible decisions in the future. In any case, it could be necessary.